Time is a funny thing, isn't it? I mean, you can't touch it, you can't see or hear it, but you can feel it creeping all around you. I've been looking at my 9 years of countdowns lately, and, well, I can definitely see and hear the difference.
He'll chop them to pieces and play a wicked bass solo at the same time, leaving those sorry wannabes in the dust.
I've come a long way, but even though things are all around better for me than they were for that undiscovered college kid who hadn't learned to edit his scripts yet, part of me is always going to be a bit nostalgic for the heyday of YouTube countdown artists, when people just couldn't get enough of this garbage and any dumb thing you had to say had an audience of people eager to absorb it. Well, if Zelda has taught me anything about time, it's that you can't live in the past, but you can certainly visit it. I plan to remake some of my earliest countdowns soon, but before I do, let's tackle a topic from another direction. The second countdown I ever made, and the one that first attracted people to my channel, bosses from the Legend of Zelda series. Zelda was always my favorite series, the topic just made sense. But, you know, I'm feeling cynical lately. So before we inevitably remake the best of the best, let's provide some context and see just how bad things can get. Zelda bosses come in many shapes and sizes, the series itself always innovating with new systems and mechanics. But if you're going to reinvent the wheel every few years, you're gonna end up with a few busted carts. These are the bosses that fail to leave an impression, that insult you with obvious weak points, that mystify you with unclear strategies, or punish you for the slightest misstep. Like the last time, I'll be doing one entry from every mainline game, and since 4 more games came out since 2011, that gives us a lot more ground to cover. And I'm focusing on the main series here, so no bosses from any spin-off games, no mini-bosses, though in some cases I'll include battles from outside a dungeon if it feels significant enough, and no final bosses, though none of them would really be the worst in their game anyway. Except maybe Breath of the Wild. You really let me down, Calamity Ganon. And I'll be ranking them based on, well, how much I hate them. So I hope you have some bottled fairies and grandma's soup on hand. It's gonna be a bumpy ride. These are the top 19 worst Legend of Zelda bosses. It's not hard to find the big losers for this list. They sink right to the bottom. The tough part of this list was choosing the worst bosses from games that, all around, had really good bosses. For Wind Waker, that meant it was less about finding faults and more about the process of elimination. The boss roster here is lean but refined. Helmarock King is a revenge fantasy realized, Goma has a clever way of taking it down, Mulgara's got a real banger of a fight song. So, at the bottom of the ladder, we have Kale Deimos. There's really nothing wrong with it, I can even give some positives here. I love the lighting, I love the sound your boomerang makes when it locks onto multiple targets. It's even got this obscure way to insta-kill it using the water from the Great Deku Tree, that's really neat. But I'm less enthusiastic about it than any of the other bosses in Wind Waker. You can get swiped really easily when trying to line up your throws, and while attacking the weak point, it's easy to overstay your welcome and have the flower close in around you. Making you sit there for what feels like forever while your health drains is never fun. Still decent, just the least decent of the bunch.
What do you even do? You just a plant? Shut up, man!
Similar to Wind Waker, Twilight Princess has what I consider one of the best selections of bosses in the series. None of them are what I call bad. Sure, both of these games lean heavily on that Zelda formula where you gotta use the dungeon item to beat the dungeon boss, hit the obvious weak point, etc. I know the big glowing eye trope is overdone, but if you don't like it, you probably haven't liked the last 15 years of Zelda. Anyway, I discussed Twilight Princess's bosses with some of my patrons and friends, and they made a really good case for Morpha, and I almost listed it. Morpha never actually attacks you, it's a fake threat, and depending on how insulted that makes you, I can really see you hating the sea anemone. But I always loved how, after impersonating a crappy Ocarina of Time boss, we'll get to that later, it erupts into the largest monster in the series, making for a boss fight large in scope and really thrilling if you don't catch on to how harmless it is. On the other hand, you have Phyrus, a corrupted Goron bound in chains and caked in flames. That should be really cool, and he'll at least attack you, but fighting him by donning the iron boots and pulling on his manacles is just sorta awkward. Morpha has zero difficulty, but it feels good. Fighting Fyrus feels a little less than good. And for me at least, I was never in danger of dying to either of these early game bosses anyway, so it's hardly worth ranking on challenge. Like the boots used to defeat him, fighting Fyrus looks attractive at first, but ultimately weighs the game down. First boss syndrome is another trend in Zelda games. Nintendo wants to throw you a soft pitch for your first big encounter to boost your confidence before moving on to bigger and better bosses, and that means that in retrospect, a lot of these beginner baddies don't look great compared to the complexity and challenge that follows. I'm usually forgiving of first bosses for this, as long as they're at least fun to fight. But in a game like Minish Cap, where all of the bosses have something going for them, the big green choo-choo has to take a bullet. I will say that the concept is amusing. The choo-choo isn't big at all, you just happen to be Minish size at the time, making this garden variety goo a gargantuan threat in comparison. But the fight is just... hey, you know that item you just got? Yeah, use that. Now swing your sword a bunch. Do that 3 or 4 times and yeah, you're done. Like Fyrus, it's a lot more exciting on paper than in the arena, but hey, Minish Cap's just getting started. It's not easy being green. Following with another first boss, Stagnox is your preliminary dungeon keeper in Spirit Tracks, and while I love how impressive this bug looks when filling up both screens of the DS, fighting it is as mediocre as fighting most of this game's bosses. Not bad, not good, just middle-of-the-road blandness. It's not so much the fight itself that bothers me, I actually think it plays pretty well. I just always found Stagnox kind of contrived. Like, Stagnox? It's a stag beetle and it's noxious. There are very few species of poisonous beetles out there. You'd think it'd get by with just its mandibles. But if you have to do this whole poison gas thing, does it have to come out of its butt? It doesn't even use the gas offensively, it's just there so you have to use your new fan item before you can attack the weak point. You made a good first impression, Stagnox, why'd you have to go and make it awkward? You know, I didn't mean to put the two DS games right next to each other, it just sort of happened that way. I actually do think that these games are underappreciated. They don't have the highest of highs or the lowest of lows. Temple of the Ocean King notwithstanding. With Phantom Hourglass, it was hard choosing a worst boss since most of them are just kind of forgettable. But someone has to take the fall here, and I ultimately had to go with Cyclock. Mainly because it involves the most waiting. You have to throw bombs into these tornadoes at the bottom screen so they can hit him on the top screen. That's a neat idea, utilizing the unique hardware, and it's nifty that you can also fling the bombs up with Cyclops projectiles. It does mean it's a little tough lining everything up, though, so you have to be patient. And if you throw the bombs into the projectiles, there's a good chance you're going to get hit in the process. I'm also not crazy about Cyclops' dumb idle animation. Like, does it look like he's sitting in a tornado right now? No, it just looks like he's sitting, lounging, loafing even. I know tornado travel is a good excuse to not make a walk cycle, but at least dangle his tentacles down or something. Maybe have him swimming through the wind, you know, like an octopus? But it's not really a big deal. I'm just shooting the breeze at this point. Boo! Ah, yes, the Game Boy games. Bosses in these games average out to being, well, quaint. It's a neat little idea, you figure out how to beat it, and you move on. And to Capcom's credit, none of the bosses in the Oracle games have actually made me angry. More often I just forget about them entirely. Octogon shows up in the 6th dungeon, and considering there's another aquatic level right after it, I can see why this sucker doesn't stick in my mind. He circles around your island, keeping his vulnerable face behind a shell until he wants to spit a projectile at you. You can wait to hit him then, or try to ricochet seeds out the walls and bankshot him if you're feeling fancy. Not much to it in that regard, you either gotta be patient or have really good aim. Then occasionally he'll dive underwater, prompting you to don your new mermaid suit and give chase for a mindless nautical swipe fest. Shifting from walking controls to the mermaid suit's controls is a little fishy, but I think what really gets me is having to constantly reload screens from above water to below. Yeah, it only takes a moment, but I just don't like it. With 3 ways to damage him, there's a lot going on, but it amounts to very little. And quite frankly, I fought enough octopodas in this series, thank you. Oh, Anglerfish, my old friend. If I had made this list back when I made the best Zelda bosses, you would have been an easy target. I mean, you were always an easy target. It was a clever attempt to change things up by using the flippers for a 2D water battle, but it's over in seconds. I could just leave it at that, except for a shocking development. Link's Awakening was remade for the Switch, and Anglerfish is actually pretty good now. It at least requires you to move around and avoid attacks for a bit, making it the weird one-off fight that it was always meant to be. So, should I still rank the original like shooting fish in a barrel? Nope, because the remake also made some revisions to other bosses, including Slime Eyes, a boss that I'd all but forgotten about, and they actually made it worse. Credit where credit is due, you can actually see its shadow from the beginning of the fight now, cluing you into how to find him unlike in the original. Just bash the wall with your Pegasus boots. Though, arguably, that just hands you a solution where you were originally supposed to figure it out. Then there's the fight proper. You're supposed to hit the obvious weak spot eye with your sword, causing it to split apart, and then finish splitting it by charging through the middle with the boots again. The problem is, while the original kept both eyes towards the front so you could hit them, then go right into your charge, in the remake they separate much farther, and with the more precise movement, you'll have the smallest window of time to charge in there before they start converging again. Like seriously though, I already figured out your puzzle, just let me kill the boss already! Then after finally crossing the eyes, you can take them out separately, the last one bouncing around to crush you. And if you don't jump when it hits the ground, you'll be stunned. But it's a good thing you'll recover before it can possibly hit you again. It seems the developers didn't think this one all the way through, making it 2 parts easy and 1 part weirdly hard. Sir, are you sure that the best approach to this encounter is basically threading a needle? Would the kids like that? Who cares? It's freaking Slime Eyes. We have to make like 10 of these bosses. Let's move on. While Oracle of Ages markets itself more around puzzle solving, here read as diving underwater when the octopus does, Oracle of Seasons focuses more on the reflex skills needed for 2D combat, revamping a lot of bosses from the original Zelda. It also revamped a boss from A Link to the Past, Mothula. Or maybe devamped is a better description, but I'm not here to pick on the Game Boy. Mothula lives up to Season's challenge by flying around erratically, spitting poison and spawning smaller moths, forcing Link to do some fancy footwork with the Roke's Feather and the spin attack in a way that makes him look kinda ridiculous, I'm not gonna lie. It's a decent challenge that can be overcome with enough focus and dexterity. The problem is this gap between the 2 platforms that you need to traverse to avoid attacks. No, this isn't one of those bottomless pits that takes away half a heart and Lakitus you back to the top again. This is a bottomed pit, and the bottom is a room below, where you'll have to climb back up to get back to the fight. And the cartridge doesn't save the damage to Mothula when you leave the room, so you gotta start over.
Oh, come on!
If this is starting to sound like a more famous boss fight in the series, don't worry, we're getting to that. So either the designers meant for Mothula to revive, which is just cruel, or it was a complete and utter accident and I'm about to sue for negligence. I like the fight otherwise, totally down for some arcade-style jumping and slashing, but for the love of Din, don't fall! Four Swords is really a nothing game when you get right down to it. It was a side mode for a remake on the Game Boy Advance, but it had its own story and a villain that got more important in the later games, so I guess we'd better acknowledge it. Derazoru is a big bouncy slug monster that waits for you at the end of the ice level, trapped in a block of ice, which makes me feel like it doesn't really belong here. Someone get this poor thing back to its natural habitat. To break it out, you need to bash it with the Pegasus boots, and then after that, bash it with the Pegasus boots again, and then keep hitting it until it plows into the ice wall. I can see how Zelda's take on bumper balls could make for an exciting party boss, but I've played this game with friends before and tolerating the mass of tangled link cables just to get it going is way more trouble than it's worth. There's also the 3DS standalone release that lets you play the game solo, and neither one was really fun. Single player makes the fight dull, and multiplayer makes it one-sided. Then Darazuru has the nerve to steal the different colored vulnerability bit from Big Man Handla, the boss from this game that I actually like, but does it worse. Couldn't you do a better version of the bumper balls thing instead of giving up halfway through and copying from your friend's homework? This worked for Big Man Handla because it was spread out over the arena and you could see the attacks coming. Here, it just moves into you while you're attacking and you just kinda have to accept it and keep swinging. And wait, if we have to freeze it to make it vulnerable, why didn't we just attack it when it was frozen at the start? Was it too frozen? That doesn't even make sense! And don't worry, the prompt tells you exactly what you have to do so you won't pull a brain muscle. This feels like it should be a mini-boss in Link's Awakening, not one of the only 4 bosses in this game. When it comes to cooperative bosses, Triforce Heroes is much better about keeping everyone involved. In fact, it's absolutely required. With the totem system for links carrying links, these bosses would be impossible with any less than 3 players, and most of them are pretty darn good in design. Your experience may vary though. Not a ton of people bought this game, so I was playing with randos online, and considering you have a shared health pool and bosses require coordination, expect a lot of failed missions that don't feel like your fault. That stinks because it means waiting in another online lobby before you replay the whole level to try again. I'm tempted to rank the lady because she's the most likely to kill your party, but then again, she is the final boss. She's supposed to be hard. Next to her, the biggest trouble I've had is leading a trio against Prismantis. Oh god, it's a fidget spinner. This game really doesn't give a fuck, does it? Like the Big Man Handla, it has multiple colors and weak points that must be attacked by the corresponding link, so if one of your team likes to hang in the back because they're not as good, well, they'll just have to man up. It's not too bad in the first phase, but then it just goes ape shucks in the second phase and starts rolling around, forcing you to think colors and totem orders just to get it all right. My teams died so often. Again, all bosses in Triforce Heroes have this potential frustration, but this is the fight that delivered the most. I know it's dangerous to go alone, but these 2 idiots aren't helping. A bit unorthodox, but I'm actually not ready to talk about my number 9 pick yet. Mainly because to understand it, I need to talk about a boss from another game, which is even worse. So keep that in the back of your mind. Here's some My dancing to tide you over. Breath of the Wild's bosses are hit or miss. There's some cool monsters in the overworld that you might consider a boss, but the dungeon bosses themselves all follow a similar Ganon template. That is, unless you count the Divine Beast encounters, the actual dungeons themselves, as bosses, which I think you should. 3 of them are high-octane thrill rides. Varudania, not so much. Playing out more like a stealth mission crossed with an escort mission. You know, everybody's favorite kind of missions!
I detect sarcasm.
You gotta scout ahead and remove obstacles for Yonobo, the lamest Goron in the series, and I get that maybe they wanted to subvert expectations with a more soft-footed Goron. Well, expectations subverted, because I thought this would be fun. If you don't count Rudania as a boss, and I wouldn't blame you for that, just wait another hour for Fireblight Ganon. Honestly, all of the dungeon bosses in this game are pretty mediocre in my opinion, save for Thunderblight. And since this game doesn't have the traditional items, they couldn't be as creative with the solutions. In this case, it's the classic sucking up bombs strategy. But mostly, I just think he's a pushover. It depends on what order you go in, of course. Windblight Ganon might actually be easier, but at least the fight's fun. But considering that Death Mountain has that whole heat death thing going on, you probably waited until you had decent armor to attempt this dungeon. And chances are you built up your weapons and health in that time too. So by the time it took for you to craft the necessary outfit, you've effectively over-leveled for this encounter. And after Rudania's battle in dungeon, I'm just not in the mood for this. Either way you look at it, things cool down when this game heats up. I want to judge each boss by its own merits, but as Fireblight just demonstrated, the path to a boss can corrode my willingness to be fair. Too bad for Morpha, who shows up at the end of Ocarina of Time's Water Temple. Though, real talk, this dungeon's not as bad as its reputation suggests. But it's still a slog, and a more kinetic boss fight would do a lot to alleviate that. Instead, we get a Jello mold. Morpha is an amoeba-like entity that controls the water around it, and think about all of the tide-turning possibilities you can do with that concept. But the N64 is just not ready for that kind of action. Instead, you wait by the water's edge for Morpha to try and grab you, knowing that if you're hit, you'll suffer a long throwing animation and an unfair amount of damage. Then Morpha's nucleus moves up and down the tentacle for some reason, and you can hookshot it out to clumsily chase after it with your sword before it bounces back to its soggy safe place. Even in the most reactionary Zelda fights, there's usually a point where the defenses are down and you can get to just wail on them with your sword. Very cathartic. But this thing is just so damn slippery! You might rinse and repeat it for 15 minutes, or you might trap it in the corner and kill it in one cycle. Who's to say? And why the heck can't I freeze it with my ice arrows? I worked hard for these things! Screw you, Morpha. Go away and let Dark Link be the boss here. My expectations for 8-bit bosses aren't exactly high. Hell, it's a blessing when they're humanly possible. And before Zelda latched onto the dungeon item boss formula, things had a more arcade feel. Just hit them and don't get hit. It's really that simple. Sometimes there was a particular way to hit them, but other times it was just about maneuverability. And there's some definite duds in there. Dodongo dislikes smoke? Well, Scorpion dislikes Dodongo. But the lamest duck with the stupidest name is the ever-forgettable Digdogger. First of all, what even is this thing? The other bosses aren't great, but in the late 80s it was at least exciting to know that you killed a dragon, or a giant spider. What the fuck is a Digdogger? It looks like a Beyblade. Okay, according to the wiki, it's a sea urchin. Yeah, that's fun to fight. Wait till I tell our friends in the Shire that we killed a sea urchin. As for the fight itself, well, you see these turrets in the corner? That's about the only interesting thing here. Digdogger itself is completely invulnerable to your attacks. Invulnerable, that is, until you play the recorder. Those 6 notes will shrink Digdogger down, and then the fight is over in one hit. At least in the dungeon that this boss is actually a part of. You see another later that splits into 3 enemies when you play the recorder, but come on, what's 3 times 0? Look, I know we didn't really know how to make games back then, but this design angers me on a fundamental level. If you don't know what to do about this boss, it's impossible, and there's no clear way to find out its weakness. Just try everything, I guess. And once you know what to do, GG. Do you get satisfaction out of that? I certainly don't. Speaking of Dodongos, I was real close to listing them for that last entry instead. They're kind of a staple in the series now, but they've always annoyed me. You gotta feed them bombs, which in the early games can be real janky to line up. And if you run out of bombs, you're up a creek. Even when they do work, it's just a wait and react enemy. I don't know what CDI Link was so excited about. This is boring.
Great! I can't wait to bomb some Dodongos!
I just thought Digdogger was a little worse. But the Dongos will have their revenge. Four Swords Adventure has this late game encounter where you bomb some Dodongos, and then the big Dodongo shows up. To hurt him, you gotta feed him a level 2 bomb. And to Four Swords Adventure's credit, it actually solves the ammunition problem. In this game, you either have bombs or you don't. No need to collect any more. And there's this big inhaling animation, so it's far less cryptic than the original. Honestly, I'd say it's even mindless, since the item you need appears from nowhere when the battle starts. But there's a new issue. This is a co-op game, right? So while one player is laying down bombs for Big Dodongo to eat, what are the other players doing? Nothing, that's what. I know this game has a lot of bosses, and some of them are gonna be throwaways, but that's pretty dumb. It's not like the boss is all that hard or all that frustrating, it's just the principle of the thing. If I was a dungeon master and I designed an encounter where one player fought a dinosaur while the other 3 waited in a bunker, I'd be laughed off a roll 20. Come on, Nintendo, you're better than this. I've been waiting for years to get this bug off my chest. I like Skyward Sword more than most, but I've always hated Moldorak. But Green Scorpion, you say? How could you, of all people, hate this boss? It's a giant scorpion. Yes, it is, but it's a giant scorpion done badly. Standing around with its claws open for you to slash at different angles, the same kind of thing that was a tutorial earlier in the game. And you can even cheese it with a Skyward Strike. And it doesn't even use its tail! What kind of scorpion doesn't use its tail? Plus, it's the boss of the Lanayru mining facility, an awesome dungeon with an amazing gimmick, localized time shifting. Surely they could have incorporated that into a boss fight, make some sort of robot that you have to age and de-age to get around its defenses or something, but no! Instead, we're leaf blowing through dust to find a scared giant scorpion. This fight is so inconsequential, the game just throws another at you later like it's no big deal. Because it is no big deal. And somehow, the imprisoned is still worse. Yeah, I have a lot of personal beef with Moldorak, but I don't think I could get away without ranking one of the least popular bosses in the series. Moldorak is disappointing, but this is actively bad. I mean, this is the vessel of demise trying to escape a 1,000-year incarceration. And what are you doing? Stabbing its toes. Its dumb, bulbous toes. And don't get too close to the feet, they give off shockwaves. Except you have to, otherwise you can't hit its toes. Skyward Strike from a distance? Good luck charging up your shot, this thing moves fast. Clearly Nintendo thought this fight was a winner because you have to do it 3 times. And when you play the boss rush to get the Hylian shield, they put all 3 versions in the boss rush. Why would you do that? Even if this fight was good, I wouldn't want to do the same thing 3 times, especially with how long and arduous this fight is. And if it gets to the top of the pit, you auto-fail and have to do it again. Now, credit where credit is due. The team up with Groose for the latter 2 fights is a great character moment. But at what cost? What happened with Skyward Sword's development? Nintendo, make more bosses or make the game shorter. And why the fuck is it in Hyrule Warriors? Now that we're at number 3, we can finally talk about number 9. Because both are Moldorm. Retweet this to Scary 90s Gamer. In both A Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, Moldorm waits for you atop the Tower of Hera, a dungeon in the game's first half. It centipedes around on a small platform with no guardrails, and to kill it, you only need to hit the end of its tail several times. The rest of it is made of rubber vibranium and bounces you back, whether you hit it with your sword or your face. Taking it down requires careful movement and timing, knowing that one wrong step will send you plummeting to your doom. And this isn't one of those instant pits that takes away half a heart and teleports you back. This is like that Mothula fight again. You're going down to a previous floor and you're gonna have to climb back up to try it again. Sounds annoying, right? So why is there such a big gap in the rankings? Well, in A Link Between Worlds, it's an annoying slap on the wrist to climb back up to the arena since, thanks to the modern hardware, it actually saves the damage that you've done before so you just pick right back up from where you left off. But in the original, Moldorm recovers all of his health every time you fall.
Oh, come on!
And I do understand that it was probably unintentional. They probably couldn't save the damage on a boss if you left the screen. But even so, Alfred Noble didn't know how dangerous dynamite would be, and Nintendo didn't realize that it made one of the worst bosses of all time. This is in the early game too. You don't have a lot of health. So having to start over again and again while your supply of hearts dwindles... Who knew such a stupid-looking monster would break a man's spirit? There's some pods on the floor below that you can break to replenish your hearts, but that just feels like an apology. And those hearts are limited. Oh sure, you remember how many pots I broke, but not how many times I hit this stupid bug! And don't think you're off the hook either, Mr. Between Worlds. Did you think Moldorm was such a memorable boss that you had to use him again? Most of Link Between Worlds bosses are taken from Link to the Past, but they usually add some kind of twist to make it more interesting. Take Stallblind, for example. That's really cool. But for Moldorm, they just took away the worst feature of the original and made it look like a cheeseburger. Don't get me wrong, that's better. It's so much better. But I'd rather not remember that this spastic pool noodle ever existed. So 3DS Moldorm gets the 9th spot, Super Nintendo Moldorm gets the 3rd, and I get a mojito to help me forget that this ever happened. These two versions of Moldorms demonstrate a difference between tedious and frustrating. It's all in how severely the player is punished for a mistake. Taking damage for getting hit? That's expected. Having to climb 2 stories every time you get hit? That's tedious. Having to start over? That's frustrating. So what if, and stay with me now, what if instead of restarting the fight when you fell, you just died? Well then, you'd have Zelda 2. The Adventure of Link is a pretty novel game for its time, and remains a conversation piece for how few of its mechanics were ever revisited in the series, or in games at all for that matter. A Zelda game with sorcerer spells? A side-scroller with highly skill-based sword fights? It's hard, yeah, but knocking the Karok off its horse with a perfectly timed down thrust, then stabbing around his shield while also blocking his attacks? It feels good if you can pull it off. Most of these bosses work in their own black sheep way as well. But Barba! Well, Barba doesn't play fair. Fun fact, Barba was supposed to be called Volvagia, which would tie him into Ocarina of Time if the translators hadn't dropped the ball. A less fun fact, this game has knockback, and this fight has bottomless pits. Barba cranes his neck around these precarious platforms at different heights, and only slices to the head can damage him, so you'll be making some death-defying jumps to sneak in the damage. He also spits fire at inconsistent intervals, and by Murphy's Law, if you get hit, you'll probably fall off the platform. No climbing up that one, Link's dead.
Oh, come on!
This game also has limited lives, so not only do you need to do enough damage without getting hit once, if you fail too many times, you'll have to redo the palace. Do you have any idea how hard these palaces are? Like, yeah, I get it. Ring outs are insta-kills. It's an ancient rule of gaming. But why set up the arena this way? Why make the only way to hurt him be right in the line of fire? Why is Barba's fire so much worse than any other attack that it should mean assured destruction if I'm even hit once? That is some Castlevania bullshit right there. Except at least Belmont got a whip and sub-weapons. Link's sword looks like a goddamn butter knife in this game. Take a stab at Barba and you'll see why Nintendo all but buried this sequel. You've probably been waiting for this one to show up. You know what game I didn't mention yet. It's Majora's Mask. It's tied for my favorite game of all time. But I'll be the first to admit that not all of it is good. In fact, a lot of it is really bad. It's got some annoying NPCs, some aggravating dungeons, and of course, some god-awful bosses. Say it with me now. Gjorg. I mean, okay, maybe these bosses aren't all bad per se. They're just kinda different. They don't have solutions set in stone. Link has a lot of attack options in this game, and main bosses just kinda have a hitbox that you can go for. There's not one glaring weakness for Odalwa, you just gotta keep hitting him however you can. Goat and Twin Mold have more obvious solutions, but you can still be a free spirit and take them out with arrows or something instead. With Gjorg, well, I've been fighting this boss for most of my life, and I'm still not really sure what to do. You'd think your new Zora mask would be best for fighting an aquatic adversary, which maybe it is? You're just kinda ramming against him until your magic depletes, which is really quickly mind you, and probably taking as much damage as you dish out, and there are a lot of angry piranhas down there. Okay, let's try staying on the island. Now we gotta wait for him to charge us, or he'll just ram the platform and knock us back into the water. Oh, okay, you can stun him with the arrows or the boomerang fins. Didn't really look like he was susceptible to that, but okay. Oh yeah, I also got these ice arrows. Are they useful for anything? Nope. Okay, stun the fish. Now use Zora Link to try and hit him. Is this working? How many times have I hit him? Please, I just want a little feedback. Am I winning or not? Someone give me a sign! Luckily, the 3DS remake is here to dumb things down. All of the bosses in Majora's Mask 3D have been revamped with big glowing weak points, which means all of the options that you used to have are now gone. Now it's just about following instructions. I don't really care for that change personally, but at least I'll finally have some clarity for fighting Gjorg. Oh my god, they made it worse! It's no clearer what you're supposed to do now, it's just less things are going to work. The arrows and boomerangs won't hurt him now until he reveals his mouth eye and swims around the water's surface for no particular reason. And if you thought to try to dive in as a Zora and use the electric barrier, he'll just not do that. So you gotta do the counterintuitive thing and wait for him. In Majora's Mask, where everything is on a time limit. Eventually, even Gjorg gets fed up with this and destroys the central platform, so it's just a water battle now. Don't you love how they nerfed Zora Link's swimming controls in this version? And how there are so many fish? So many goddamn fish! Oh, okay, he tries to eat you, so trick him into eating one of the mines. I certainly hope the mines don't blow up on you instead, or the dozens of little fish that you can't kill now because your magic ran out 5 minutes ago. But it's gonna be fine, just be patient. In Majoras Mask, the game that's always timed. It's not like the world's gonna end if I take too long. It's not like I'll have to redo the entire goddamn Great Bay Temple again, but I'll gladly do all of that after all. This is my favorite fucking game of all time! You know, it's funny. Majora's Mask is so unbelievably flawed. All the remake wanted to do is make things easier for all the new players who wanted to experience it. And for some reason, I can't seem to like it this way. Maybe it's a nostalgia, maybe I can't stand that other people will beat this game without suffering like I suffered. Or maybe the worst boss in the series, somehow, made this game better for me. It exercised more than one emotion for me and made the playthrough a lot more memorable. It made me feel like I triumphed over something, made me feel accomplished. The bosses on this list get so bad, but they never make me hate the game. They just give me more to share with other fans. Can a boss really be bad if it's brought you so much joy? Yes, it absolutely can. Fuck this fish. I'm the Green Scorpion, and I thank you for celebrating the worst of the best. Share with me some of the bosses that make your blood boil, or tell me how wrong I am about Georg and that I need to get good. Whether you enjoyed this list or hated it, I hope it entertained you. After all, sometimes the worst experiences can help you highlight the best. And until next time, stay out of the water. Oh, and aim for the eyes.